In high school, there was a boy named Heinrich, which was an unusual name in my town. Practically everyone kept their distance from him, except for his two friends, who were equally unpleasant. In my junior year of high school, I had the misfortune of sitting right next to him in one of my classes. I immediately planned to ask the teacher for a seat change at the end of the hour on the first day. Before I had the chance, Heinrich was already bothering me. He kept asking where I got my bag, my shoes and my shirt, whether my hair color was natural or dyed, and all this coming from someone whose butt you could smell from 10 feet away. I endured the first hour of class and stayed behind to talk to the teacher, but she completely ignored me. She was one of those teachers who never had expectations for anyone or anything. Some older students had warned me about her before. I thought she would overlook letting a girl sit next to this creep for the entire school year, but no. It only took a few days for Heinrich to develop a crush on me. To make matters worse, I still walked to and from school. Heinrich found out about this and took the opportunity to accompany me home one day, or as he put it, to escort me home to make sure I was safe, as if I hadn't been able to protect myself for the past 2 years. My home was a 15-minute walk from school. Normally, it was a perfect time and led through a good area, a moment to relax between responsibilities and clear my head. Heinrich turned this into eternal hell. We were within sight so that everyone at school could see us. Most people knew what was going on, but some really thought that I wanted to spend time with him. When I found out that I had to sit next to him permanently, I tried to be as nice as possible, which wasn't very nice, but even that was too much. It was too late to be rude because I had also tried that, and it didn't work. He found a way to praise everything I said and did, constantly comparing us and arguing that we were somehow very similar. He was obsessed with the idea that we could be together and be like Bonnie and Clyde, but our names weren't even similar to theirs. The worst part about him walking with me was the fact that he knew where I lived. It's no surprise that he tried to invite himself in, but I set a clear boundary there and almost spat in his face. The only reason I didn't is because he probably would have liked it. I tried to talk to my counselor about whether I could change classes, but that was also useless. He said things like Heinrich hadn't done anything wrong, which was practically useless to me. At the beginning of September, we had a 3-day weekend for Labor Day. I was looking forward to being away from Heinrich for 1 day longer, but I was fully aware that he was responsible for me not being able to connect with my school friends who didn't have plans for the weekend. I was so depressed that I just wanted to go to bed. I only had one thing planned, a baby shower on Saturday for a relative I barely knew. The night before, I slept terribly. I was overwhelmed by anxiety, seemingly for no reason, and every time I started to fall asleep, I fell directly into a nightmare about Heinrich. At some point, I even woke up believing I saw his face in the window. It almost stopped my heart, but when I blinked, it disappeared. Just to be sure, I got up and looked outside, but there was no sign of him in the backyard. I closed my blinds and even pulled the sheer curtains that I never use. I couldn't sleep at all anymore. I really couldn't decide if what I had seen was real or just a visual disturbance. Sometimes when I wake up, I see a crystal clear vision of a giant spider coming towards me, but when I blink, it disappears before my body becomes awake enough to move. In the morning, I asked my parents to pay special attention to making sure we locked the house well before we went to the baby shower. I told them about the situation with Heinrich and how he had been following me everywhere. Fortunately, they at least cared about me. My father assured me that he would lock the house well, and my mother went even further by reminding me that I was good at using a stun gun. Then she gave me the small pepper spray bottle from her keychain. That made me feel a little better, but I was still on edge all day. My relatives kept asking me if everything was okay, and all I could say was yes. We didn't get home until 8 p.m. I grabbed a snack in the kitchen, and while I was there, I made sure the back door was still locked. After that, I went straight to my room and watched YouTube videos on my laptop until I fell asleep. Minutes later, I woke up but couldn't move. I couldn't breathe either. I was trapped in a sleep paralysis. The closest thing I had ever had to a sleep paralysis demon was the spider I mentioned before, but there was no sign of a spider. I kept trying to force myself to breathe, but it was as if I had forgotten how to do it. I tried to relax instead, and looked around my room, but I became nervous because it was darker than usual, because of the curtains, of course. I could clearly see Heinrich's face looking over the edge of my bed. My heart almost jumped out of my chest, but I still couldn't move. I continued to stare at his face, hoping it would disappear, and praying it was a hallucination. But when I blinked, he didn't disappear. He moved. Heinrich slowly stood up and came towards me. "Let's have a pajama party," he whispered, as he approached my mouth with a strip of tape. At the last second, I managed to free myself from the grip of sleep paralysis, and screamed as I grabbed the pillow that was next to me, and pressed it into his face. Blindly, he stuck the piece of tape on my mouth, but since he couldn't see what was happening, I quickly reached under the pillow I had been sleeping on, and grabbed the pepper spray that my mother had given me, and triggered the mechanism as she had explained it to me. Then I pointed it directly at his face, just as he ripped the pillow away. I sprayed the spray, and hit him as well as I could, but some of it hit me too. We were paralyzed, but luckily only another 15 seconds passed before my parents rushed into my room. At that point, they performed a citizen's arrest until the police arrived. The police officers checked the house and found damage to the outside of the back door lock, indicating that Heinrich had broken the lock. It really doesn't surprise me that picking locks is something he's good at. Heinrich was sent to juvenile detention for a few weeks, and then through a tedious bureaucratic process, I managed to get him expelled from school. Once, I was in a relationship with the craziest girl I've ever met. I was pretty desperate for love when I thought I had fallen for her. Man, she might have been the most attractive girl I'll ever be with, but it wasn't worth it. I realized that she was extremely detrimental to me. She spent all my money, drove all my friends away, and as soon as she had me to herself, she took away all my free time and drained my life force. I'm not even going into the smallest details about all the little things that made her madness, her own special kind of madness. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and ended it in the most human way possible. I did it in person, in a private place, in my car right in front of her apartment. She cried, screamed, slapped me in the face, threw a few things, and made a big mess in my car. But no matter what she said, I told her that there was no chance that I would ever be with her again. She walked away angrily, with the last thing she told me before slamming the car door being that I would regret treating her badly. Actually, I regret even agreeing to sleep with her. As soon as I was gone, I felt a wave of relief, as if I had freed myself from an evil witch's spell. I spent the rest of the day doing all the things I could never do when she was around. Then I called my friends and went to the bar with them for the first time in a month. I told them how everything happened, and they warned me about something, just like they had warned me about the dangers of crazy girls the first time I was with her. "That's not over," they said. "You may have broken up with her, but she hasn't broken up with you yet." They couldn't have been more right. That same night, as my friends and I were leaving the bar, I went to my car and noticed something in the gap between the hood and the windshield. I looked closer and pulled out a rusty and twisted steel nail, 6 inches long. I keep my car very clean, so I was pretty sure it hadn't been there in the morning. I don't know anything about witchcraft or magic and don't believe in such things, but my ex-girlfriend was a proud self-proclaimed witch, so I suspected that she had something to do with it. I asked one of my friends to ask his girlfriend about it, and she confirmed what I thought, explaining that my ex probably used it for some kind of curse, and then left it there to make sure it caused the damage it was supposed to cause. But I thought that was nonsense. Still, I worried about what the woman might do. After I found out that it was definitely from my ex, I threw it in the trash. Unfortunately, that was just the beginning. The next week was a nightmare. Many parts of it are probably familiar to many. One morning, I woke up and saw a bunch of key marks on my car. Apparently they were runes. The next day, 3 of my tires were flat. 24 hours later, there were a bunch of broken pieces of glass and rusty nails at my door, surrounded by a dark stain on the concrete. My friend's girlfriend said that it was probably a war water vial. I don't know what that means, and I didn't really care. At some point I even started seeing her out of the corner of my eye, just flashes. When I really turned around to look at her, she was already around the corner, or behind something and too far away for me to do anything about it. I was just as annoyed as I was scared. I didn't know what she was capable of, but her intentions were clearly not good. Days after our breakup, there was a psychotic letter on my door, impaled with, you guessed it, a long rusty and twisted steel nail of Zoll length. Basically, it said that if I didn't want to suffer the worst torments in this life, and then even more in the afterlife, I should immediately go to her apartment, crawl to her feet, beg for forgiveness, and swear that I would serve her perfectly. Really crazy stuff. Of course, I didn't do anything. I had work the next day. I had stopped turning my life around this immature idiot. I had just picked up my car from the shop after getting new tires, and since she had already attacked my car before, I thought that she would do something else. I was right, but that wasn't all. When I returned to my car at the end of my shift, my heart sank. I could see it from 100 feet away. A far damned rusty and twisted steel nail, 6 inches long, but this time she had stuck it through my windshield, causing it to shatter into 1,000 pieces. Fortunately, the composite film held everything together, but it was completely impossible to see through it. I pulled out my phone and sat in my car to call another tow truck, but the moment I closed the door, I smelled it, my ex's perfume, and it was strong. A shiver ran down my spine at that moment. Instinctively, I knew that she was right behind me. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw her crawling out of the bottom of the back seat, the look of pure evil in her face, smiling, hugging me from behind in a strange kind of back embrace. And then I realized that she was holding one of those rusty and twisted steel nails, 6 inches long, in her hands, pointed at my heart, and through the glint at the tip, it was clearly sharp. She was ready to stab it into my heart. I laughed. "You're not strong enough to stick that through my breastbone with that," I said. "Shut up," she screamed. "I'm strong enough to stick it through your windshield, aren't I? Wasn't that what I did? And what if I stick it into one of your ribs, or why don't I stick it into your throat? How about that? Smarter." She brought the tip of the nail to my carotid artery, though I didn't care at all at the moment. Suddenly, I was overcome with anger. My patience was exhausted. All I saw was red. I grabbed my keys and started my car. "What are you doing?" my ex screamed. "Don't go anywhere, or I'll stick this in." She started the nail into my flesh and let me bleed, but I hardly felt it. I shifted into first gear and slammed on the gas pedal. The nail cut at the side of my neck as my ex flew backwards into the seat. She began to scream like crazy and try to regain her balance to be able to come at me, but I was already in second gear, racing through the parking lot lanes, struggling to see through the broken windshield. As I was just about to climb over the center console, I slammed hard on the brakes. Suddenly, I noticed how much pain was in my neck, but finally she got what she deserved and crashed against the windshield. The film still didn't give way, and held her in like a nut holding her in. I pulled the handbrake, got out, and then pulled the screaming crazy out of my car and threw her onto the asphalt. I got back into my car and locked the doors. Then I called the police. When they came, my ex was banging on the door and trying to break her way into my car. "Look what you've done to me," she screamed, pointing to her face. There was a deep wound on the right side of her face, from above her right eyebrow to the corner of her mouth. When the police arrived, I was arrested, and she was taken to the hospital. She filed charges, and we almost went to trial, but at the last minute the case was dismissed, due to my lawyers bringing the harassment she had been committing before the judge. Ultimately, my actions were deemed self-defense. Things aren't over for me. Unfortunately, she has found a new way to ruin my life. Now I'm being sued in a civil trial, but I believe my counterclaim will prevail in the end. This just shows that you should make impulsive decisions, don't meet crazy people, and I assume even if a sharp object is pointed at your throat, you should defend yourself as gently as possible. When I was in college and living in the dorms, I spent most of my study time in the library or the Starbucks on campus. The library was free to enter and quieter, but the Starbucks was closer to most of my classes and had coffee. Plus, I could spend time with my friends there. It was a popular place for this reason, and also my preferred study spot. I never paid attention to what was going on around me, or who was sitting in the cafe. My ability to focus was pretty strong, especially with the help of caffeine and my medication for my attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. My friends, however, were not like that. They were much more talkative and liked to people watch during their breaks. At the beginning of the second semester, a new person appeared in the cafe. If no one had told me about it, I would have assumed that he had been there all year like everyone else. But my friends knew that they had never seen this guy before. He seemed harmless at first, like anyone else, and was more of a potential new gossip topic than any kind of threat. When they called my attention to it, I just saw another guy with a latte working on his laptop, taking notes and listening to music. My friends asked me what I thought of him, if he was cute, or if I knew who he was. He was a little pale and a little greasy, with a weak chin, but generally he was unremarkable. "He's a stranger," I said, "and pretty ugly." Maybe I said that too loud, because the noise and laughter of my friends made him look at us for just a second. I looked away and continued to work. The next day he was back in the cafe doing exactly the same thing as the day before. He was writing things in his notebook, looking at his laptop and looking around. I didn't think anything of it, even when I saw him every day, as I spent the whole next week there. The only thing that seemed weird to me was the fact that I was paying attention. Sure, I saw the same 50 faces there every time, but I had never noticed his existence. What did this guy have that I was unconsciously paying attention to? No idea, but I had more important things to do again. Taking notes in classes, listening to lectures and reading textbooks. I had a class that week that was right next to the library, so naturally I did my studying there after class, instead of going to the Starbucks on the other side of campus. It was nice to have a break. The silence was always pleasant. No one spoke in the library. Everyone was in their own world, with their heads down and focused on their tasks, except for this guy. About 10 minutes into my study session, I saw him sitting about 10 tables away. I rolled my eyes and tried to ignore him, but he was still looking at me. Not just fleeting glances, but he was watching me for a few seconds, and then looking away as soon as he noticed that I saw him. At this point it seemed as if he might have a crush on me, but I was determined not to let any guy distract me from achieving my goals. After a few more days, however, he disappeared into the background. The novelty wore off and I didn't care if he was around or not. Unfortunately, as much as I tried to ignore him, the more often he showed up everywhere I went, even on my way back to my dorm after the class that ended at 8 p.m. I was just trying to get home after a long day of classes. I walked through the door of the building and no one was behind me, except for the other students in the class that had just ended, none of whom I knew had a pale, greasy face with a weak chin. But as soon as I went down the steps and onto the sidewalk, who did I see if not him? My stomach sank at that moment. I kept walking because I wanted to avoid the interaction. Eventually I was just standing there alone with him still following behind me. I walked down the hall to my dorm and went to the door that was on the first floor. I was afraid that this crazy would come in with his ID and follow me, but when I got to my room door I looked around. He was standing in front of the glass and staring at me. I quickly went into my room and closed the door behind me. Unfortunately, my roommate wasn't there to reassure me. The claustrophobia began to creep in, so I put on some music and tried to study before going to sleep, but I couldn't concentrate. It took me hours to finish what should have only taken an hour. Finally, at 11 p.m. I was done. I fell exhausted into bed. I didn't even move when my roommate came home. I had some weird nightmares, but I don't remember much about them. All I know is that I woke up in a cold sweat. When I got out of bed, I noticed something so concerning that it changed my way of life in many aspects. A piece of paper was stuck to my stomach because I had been sweating. When I got up, it fell to the floor. I picked it up and read it. There were only 6 words written on it. "You are a victim, an ugly one." My heart sank. My roommate asked what was wrong, and I begged her to tell me if she had closed the door when she came back from the party she had gone to the night before, but she just shrugged her shoulders. When we checked, we found that she had left the door wide open when she came in, staggering. That could mean that the door was wide open for this stranger to break into our room, and for what? Just to scare me. Slowly things began to make sense, albeit in a twisted and sick way. I didn't want to understand what was happening, but I couldn't prevent it. I hadn't noticed that I had been getting stalked for the last month. This guy with the weak chin didn't even go to school. That's why he didn't show up until the middle of the year, and no one knew who he was or why he couldn't go into the dorm without following someone. All the notes he was taking were about my routine, maybe other girls too, but I couldn't understand why. Was it really just because I had said he was ugly? Did that send him into a month of obsession? I reported it immediately, but the university's response was inadequate. They said if I ever had a problem with it again, I should report it to the police. I guess, however, that this sick person was bored with me and my university. He was never seen again.